Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're listening to us from. Welcome to yet another episode of Footprints. Footprints is a podcast that tells the stories of our elders and gleans the wisdom from their lives. Today, our special guest is Pastor Gary Skinner. Can I just call you Gary?
Gary, by all means.
Yeah, by all means. And thank you very much for being our guest today. And I'm going to ask you to take us way back in time. Once upon a time when you were a young boy, what was that like? Where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you go to school?
I was born in a little town called Umtali, southern Rhodesia. It's now Mutare, Zimbabwe. And my dad was a printer. He came to Africa in 1936 with his parents, who were missionaries to Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
They moved to Zimbabwe. It's where my dad met my mother. And then he was invited to move to South Africa to run a printing press that printed Christian literature, tracts, evangelism material, and it became a school for training pastors and so on. And so that's where I was born. That's where I grew up. I grew up in Africa. I am an African. I have a Canadian passport and a British passport, but I'm an African through and through. Yeah.
So where did you go to school? What were you like as a boy?
Quiet, shy, withdrawn, introverted, not great at school, didn't like school. I don't mind learning. I don't mind studying, but there was the formal classes that I hated. My high schooling, most of my schooling really, I did in South Africa. Those were good days living in the little town called Nelspruit, Eastern Transvaal. My dad would travel across the border into Mozambique, where we also did some work. My dad also planted churches. He put up a tent in a small rural community, be there for 3 months, preach every night with local evangelists as well, and plant a church and move on. So that's where I grew up, and that's where I felt as a boy. I loved the animals in the national park. I wanted to be a game warden. It's all I wanted to do.
Any particular animal that you liked?
So the cheetah was my favorite at that time. That's a leopard now. I don't know why. But I dreamed about it. I knew all the animals by name, their Latin names and their gestation periods, and I was just excited about it. And then one day God clearly said to me, I don't want you to look after animals. I want you to look after people. And I remember saying, but God, I don't like people. I like animals. People, you got to be nice to them all the time. Animals, they give you a hard time, you just shoot them. That's much easier. But you can't fight with God and win. I knew He wanted me to do ministry, to be a pastor. So no, I surrendered to that. So being a boy was good memories for me. I look back with fondness on all the things that I did. My sports, I was a sportsman, played lots of sports, swimming, cricket, tennis, golf, soccer, played them all, loved them all. Played in a school marching band. I was a lead trumpeter, loved all of that. Picked up a guitar. I asked for a guitar. They bought me the cheapest little guitar they could because they thought I'd forget about it. Yes, but I learned to play the guitar, and I did okay with it. Wrote a lot of music and sang a lot of stuff, and so those were just all good days. Yeah, my boyhood was a wonderful boyhood.
Yeah. How did you come upon music for you? Like how? Yeah, where did?
Well, I could go to church all the time. You got music all the time, but then you listen to the radio or whatever, and you say, "Wow, that's nice. I'd like to learn to play that." And so I did. My favorite band was the Bee Gees, but nobody knows them these days.
You said you were in Africa. Then what?
Well, every 4 years or so, we would go back to Canada. 5 years, 7 years, we'd go back to Canada. My dad would travel, raise the funds that was necessary to do missionary work. So we spent a year in Canada twice, one in my boyhood. But I never felt at home in Canada, ever. I hated the weather. It was freezing cold, and it was just a foreign world to me. But when I was back in Africa, I was at home. I still feel that way today. I'm still, many people might look at me and say, oh, he's a Canadian, but yeah, I'm an African in my heart. I'm an African. I love Africa. I believe in Africa. I love Africans. I love everything about Africa. But my deepest passion is that Africa would become a continent that would be full of young people who will raise a new culture that will change the world. The world's gone mad. In Africa, the young people are ready to rise up, and yeah, that's my dream. So I'm an African.
Yeah. And very passionate about young people. And, so you would go to Canada twice a year?
No, about twice during my boyhood.
Oh, twice during your boyhood.
Only for a year, would stay for a year.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we would be living in South Africa, Zambia. We moved to Zambia. My dad went to Zambia for a while. And we spent some of my boyhood in Zambia. It's northern Rhodesia then.
Mm-hmm. That's long ago.
Long ago.
That's very long ago. So trace for us your journey to Uganda.
Well, after high school and wanting to be a game warden, and then God saying no, I felt I needed to go to Bible college, study theology. So I went to Canada and I studied for 3 years and I earned a diploma in theology. A lot of people were going on to get a degree in theology, but I didn't want to. I didn't feel to. So I didn't. I never got a degree of any kind. I went straight into this, well, first of all, a rock and roll band, doing Christian rock and roll on the streets of Canada and the U.S., doing evangelism, and that's where Marilyn and I met. She was the piano player, I was the guitar player, lead singer, and she had a part to play in one song, so I turned to look at her and she winked at me. And that was the start. That's the way it was. She says it's not true, but it is. And we fell in love, got married, spent the first year of our marriage traveling, doing street evangelism. It was very exciting. And then we pastored. We were asked to pastor youth pastors in a small church. And then we pastored on our own in a small farming community. But I knew, and she knew, that we would be going back to Africa at some point. So those were the early years. Our children, 2 of our children were born in Canada. Our youngest, James, was born in Kalalushi, Zambia, a mining town just outside of Kitwe in the Copper Belt. Yeah, we've been in Africa ever since.
Yeah. So then you're in Zambia and pastoring a church. So then how do you even hear about Uganda? How did that happen?
Well, everybody knew about Uganda at that point because Uganda was in the headlines quite often because there was a very charismatic character who ran the country by the name of Idi Amin. And he's infamous for his tactics and his style and so on. And we were sitting around a table one day just talking about life, and Uganda came up in the conversation. And it was at the time when there was a lot of trouble in Uganda, the end of Idi Amin's time. Obote was back. And as we were talking about it, I heard Jesus as clear as anything I've ever heard in my life say, I want you to go to Kampala and plant an English-speaking church downtown. And through that church, I'm going to touch the city. I'm going to touch the nation. I knew we were to come to Uganda. I just knew it. And so I just began to speak it to Marilyn and to friends and so on.
But before how did you process that? Or were you, had you traveled enough in your Christian journey to know when God says, I do?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is something that some people find a little strange about who I am, but I seem to just be able to have a relationship with Jesus that I feel like I'm talking to him. And it's as if we're in a conversation. And it's an impression in the inside, and my thoughts become my words back to him. So it was just as if he said to me, that clearly I want you to do this. So it wasn't difficult for me. I knew that's what I was supposed to do. I just knew that I knew. And I think that's one of the amazing things about being a follower of Jesus is that you can know. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice. They do hear my voice." And the sheep know the shepherd's voice. They don't know someone who's not the shepherd. Someone else speaks. Yeah, they'll know it's not their shepherd.
And that's the thing, when people say, "How do you know?" Like, I don't know how to explain to you.
No, you can't. You just know.
You just know.
You just know.
So did you do a reconnaissance visit, or you just said, "Yeah, let's come"?
No. We were finishing in Zambia, and Zambia was good. It was not difficult in terms of the insecurity, but there were things that were difficult about it. But I just felt our time was up. And I remember when we walked out into the airport to leave Zambia, I felt it was the closing because God had already said Uganda. And we were traveling back to Canada, and the World Pentecostal Conference was being held in Nairobi. And we were invited to come and lead worship at that conference with people all around the world. So I said, while I'm there, let me go to Uganda. But it was too dangerous to come to Kampala. So I drove up to the border and met a missionary that was here, Paul Willoughby, who lived in Umtali, and we went across into Umtali. And the moment I walked onto Ugandan soil, I felt like I've come home. It was a strange feeling. We went to our first church service on a Sunday in Kuni, just north of Mbali, and it was a little rural church. We went out into the rocks, and they said, "We're going to have church in the rocks today, outside, not in the little church building." And I guess they were doing it for me a little bit because that's where they used to meet when Idi Amin was the president, and the soldiers would come because the church was persecuted in those days. And
I think that's a story.
Shinani Luwum was killed by. Yeah, and our general superintendent of the Pentecostal Assemblies of God was killed. So we went up that church where they had church in those days because they could see the soldiers come and they could disperse. And standing in these huge rocks with huge trees, fig trees, birds flitting around was my first church service in Uganda. And I preached my first sermon from a rock was the pulpit. But for us, I knew it wasn't the rural church we were to serve, but it was to be the city church, to reach young people. So I wanted to come to Kampala, but I couldn't. It was too dangerous. But I knew just coming into Uganda that this is where we were to be. Went back to Canada, asked our denomination if we could now transfer to Uganda. They said, "No, it's too dangerous. We don't want you to go. It's not the right time. We don't want your blood on our hands. You can't go." I knew Jesus wanted us to go. And I went through one of the greatest battles of my life when I felt like, should I just say, "Well, God spoke, I'm going."
I know, right?
And just leave the denomination and do what I wanted. And a number of things happened, that money and some goods came into my hands to help me if I wanted to come. And Jesus again said, one word: submit. Submit. And I knew that he wanted me to submit to my leadership, even if they were wrong. So I said, okay, and I'll go back to Zambia. And about 3 weeks later, they phoned me. I was about to go onto a platform in Ottawa, Canada, capital city. And they said, "We can't not let you go. We have to let you go. God spoke to us. You're to go." So I then said, well, I need to go to Kampala. If I'm going to go, I want to go because I know it's dangerous. So I flew into Nairobi. There were no flights coming into Entebbe in those days. The airport was closed. And we had to drive in. And we drove in across the border. And there was the atmosphere was difficult in Uganda, oppressive. The moment you left Kenya, you sensed the spiritual warfare. We got to Kampala.
And what years were it?
That was 1982. And we drove. The roads were unbelievably bad. And there was army checkpoints every 20 kilometers. And, they'd let us go by, but a lot of people were having trouble traveling in those. Anyway, we got to Kampala. And I remember we stayed at Namirembe Guest House.
It was our home too when we came back on. Yeah.
And I stood on the hill, and there was a storm, a huge storm brewing, and a rainbow appeared across the city as I was watching. And I took that as a promise from God, that at the foot of the rainbow there's a pot of gold. And that pot of gold is the people of Uganda that you are to serve. So I just knew we were to come. But it was dangerous, as, we heard gunfire every night. Our first years in Uganda, we were broken into so many times we don't remember. We were held up twice at gunpoint, lost our first 2 cars at gunpoint. So anyway, so we came, but even though it was difficult, I knew we were to come. So I went back, we got ready and brought our little family. And
but how do you persist through the difficulty?
When you have a word from God, you can't do anything else. There have been 10,000 times we would have quit it.
Yeah.
Because it was difficult, very difficult. But the thing that kept us going was knowing that this was what Jesus wanted us to do. And, we do forget, I think, that the Church of Jesus has been built over the centuries on the blood of the martyrs. And the darker the night, the brighter the light. Where sin abounds, there the grace of God does much more abound. If you want to do something great for God, don't go look for something that's easy. Go and find something that's difficult, that's really needed. Pour yourself into it, and it may be difficult, but God will do something amazing. So as I look back now, because this is about an old elders, I would say walk into any adventure that God has for you, no matter how difficult it seems. And if you pay with your life, so what? Others have. But if not, he will do something that I sit 40 years later, and what God has been able to do is just amazing. It's not what we did. It's not our brilliance. It's not our great preaching or our great music abilities. And I hope we preach well, and I hope we do music, but God works by his Holy Spirit in the lives of people. So you get a word from God. That's all you need.
Yeah. And do it.
Do it. Just do it. No matter how difficult it is. Mm-hmm.
So you come here into Kampala and then think, this is where I've been called to open an English-speaking church. So how do you start to build that vision?
Well, it was very clear it was to be an English-speaking church. And in my heart, I knew that meant young people. And most of the churches at that time were Luganda. And maybe some had an English-speaking service, but there were none that were just English. And so we started that way, and we started out in a classical Pentecostal style. And we led worship and preached, and young people just started coming. And I think the style of music and the style of communication attracted them. And in those early days, people said, no, it's just a young people's church. It's a fad. It will die. But young people, I think, were looking for a fresh expression of Christianity that wasn't just classic and traditional Ugandan style of worship, very dominated by older people. The whole culture of Uganda was changing, and a huge part of who we are is that we are here to change culture, not just national culture, but church culture. Culture is changing all the time from forces outside of culture, and not all of those changes are good. And you're never going to stop cultural change. So why should we back off and say we should not be a part of cultural change when it's going to happen? Rather, let's bring a godly influence. So our goal at the beginning was to not bring Canadian culture or Western culture, or not even depend upon classical Ugandan culture, but really build kingdom culture, Bible culture, Christ culture, the character of Christ. And so that's why we did what we did. And the music and the preaching and the style of church attracted young people like like bees to honey. And many of those young people were from Anglican churches, or many of them were from Catholic backgrounds, and some of them none. And it created a little bit of a kerfuffle at those times, because a lot of young people started coming to Watoto, and the classic Anglican bishops and all the rest weren't too happy about that. But over the years, that's changed. And
if I can, we were just talking about it coming here, that those days we used to steel ourselves to come and be our bitterness and then run well. How, knowing that it existed, did you do anything about it? Like, did you reach across to the prelates on the other side, or did you just say, God, you will take it away?
Never, ever did I ever at any time feel that Watoto Church, who was Kampala Pentecostal Church in those days, was the answer to the spiritual problems of Uganda. I still feel this very strongly, the only hope for a genuine, powerful move of God is when the churches crucify their own ambitions and plans and get together with one another and egos and get together with one another and lift up Jesus. Whether you're Anglican, whether you're Pentecostal, whether you're Baptist, that's not the issue. We need to be united. I've tried my best to promote unity. It hasn't happened.
Yeah.
I felt, and this is something that people may not like, but I felt far more affinity with the Anglican community than I did the wacky Pentecostal side. Because there was some pretty strange, and there still are some pretty strange Pentecostal churches out there that are doing stuff that, in my opinion, hurts the church. So you have the wild on the one side, and you have the rather conservative dead on the other side. God wanted us to run right down the middle. And he said it to me one day, I want you to be alive but not wild. I want you to be conservative, but not dead. So we've run a church that has classical things about it that is, steady and theology and good Bible preaching and teaching, but at the same time exciting music that's up to date and fresh. Well, young people want that.
Yes.
They don't want the wacky stuff, and they don't want the ultra-conservative stuff. And I think over the years, what Watoto Church has been able to do has had an influence, I hope, on both sides. So you look at much of the Anglican community now singing, and their style of worship has changed. I hope we've had an influence in that. That's what we were here for. We were here for to get young people to be excited about being Christian and serving God. So out of that, we developed, a vision for transformation. There's so much to say about it.
There's so much to say. And I was going to say, so clearly you start out, this is the church we're going to build. And then AIDS.
Mm-hmm.
How did that bend come about? So ye.
Well, AIDS hit us like a bomb, and it was the talk of everybody. It was everybody's focus at that time. People were dying like flies, and we just were burying people every week, and there was no antiretrovirals. Nobody knew, and it was tough. But so we decided to address the issue of sexuality. And we did it in concert with other churches, and we did it as churches in concert with the government of Uganda. The Museveni family, Mrs. Museveni specifically, was very focused on young people, and so there was a coming together of the church and the government, and promoted what we called the ABCs, of
staying faithful in
Christ.
Oh, okay.
We started with Christ.
Oh, and then it became this.
It became because the rest of the world saw the massive influence of the ABCs in Uganda. It was effective, but they didn't exist. They didn't like Christ. And so the church agreed, and we got together. We didn't want to drop Jesus, but that's the way it was. So it was very effective also in in helping young people. We always preach every year. We have a series on sexuality.
Interesting.
Because sexuality is such a huge part of who we had a problem and who we are and the good things about who we are too. But also in the middle of all of that was that we had not only one of the highest rates of infection in the world, but we had the highest number of orphans. And then there was child-headed households and the whole issue of the extended family being stretched to limits. And a lot of young people don't know this because they weren't around in those days.
But yeah, when you say that, I remember literally we had several relatives that my parents were taking care of. So like you said, if you weren't around, you didn't know that literally, not just the relatives, their children, yeah.
I went with one of our church members who was working with an aid organization to Rakai. And I was taken to the home of a grandmother who had 26 of her grandchildren with her. She had 7 children. 6 had already died. 1 was dying. She wept. What am I going to do? And I felt God say to me, look after the children. So that is how Watoto Child Care Ministries was born. I felt that God wanted us to pick up, rescue the most vulnerable orphaned children. And we started to pick up one by one until eventually we've cared for now over 5,000 boys and girls. We've put them in homes, built homes, sent them in choirs around the world to raise the funds. And it became very much a big part of who Watoto Church is. In fact, we changed our name from Kampala Pentecostal Church to Watoto Church. Why would anybody call themselves Children's Church? People in the rest of the world don't know that, but here they do. And it's because our focus is on children. Our focus is on young people. Our focus is on raising the next generation. And very clearly, Jesus said to me, I don't want you to rescue children. I want you to raise leaders. And I don't want you just to raise leaders. I want you to rebuild a nation. I remember when I was young, when somebody talked like that, I used to think, how arrogant are you that you think you could change a nation? And here I got the same language now. And it's not me changing a nation. It's the church. When the church begins to care for the hurting people of our community. It's not about filling a church full of people and having good worship and a great sermon and feeling good about ourselves when people all around us are hurting and they're in pain and they're lost and they don't have answers. So my dream as a pastor has always been to raise up a congregation of people who won't just come to church, but they will be the church.
Yeah.
And it's not what one man does in a pulpit on Sunday that matters. It's what everybody does on Monday in the community that matters. And so that's become the focus of Watoto Church. And the child care ministries wasn't just rescue an orphan. It was raise a leader to rebuild a nation. Well, when you have that kind of vision and you can share that kind of vision to a church full of young people, they buy that vision and they know they're living for more than just going to church, but being the church. And I think if there's any success at Watoto Church, it's because there is a powerful God-birthed vision to do more than just go to church.
Speak a bit about leadership. What makes that so important in the world?
Yeah.
and especially for then church to be part of building leaders.
Well, someone said, I don't know who, everything rises or falls on leadership.
Maxwell.
I firmly believe that. God is always looking for, if there's a problem, God looks for a man or a woman who he raises up to be a leader to solve that problem. That's the story of the Bible. And whether it's David being raised up or whether it's Joseph being raised up or whether it's a prophet being raised up, he looks for a leader. And he gives that leader a word. He gives that leader a vision. And that leader then lives his life to fulfill that vision. And that's what he did for me. He gave me a vision, plant an English-speaking church. The vision unfolded as I began to understand more about what kind of church. So I am a leader. I hope I'm a good leader. I'm a visionary leader. I'm a passionate leader. And I sell that vision. People buy the vision. It becomes not his vision, but our vision. And then we work together. The vision has to be noble. It has to be grand. It has to be big. It has to be transforming. It has to take us somewhere good and better. And whether that's a political leader or whether it's a church leader or whether it's a business leader, you are there as a leader to serve the people that you are leading. Take them somewhere. If we can have godly leadership that is taking people to a better place, we will build a better nation. And whether that's political or economic or educational, all sectors of life, my role as a pastor is to provide leadership in what, well, again, my opinion is the church is at the core of society. God raised Jesus from death and set him on a throne in deepest heaven, in charge of running the universe, everything from galaxies to governments, no name, no power exempt from his rule, and not just for the time being, but forever. And this is now, I'm talking from Ephesians chapter 1. At the center of all this, Christ rules the church. The church, you see, is not peripheral to the world. The world is peripheral to the church. Here it is. The church is Christ's body through which he speaks and through which he acts. God plants a church in the core of the community to bring about cultural change, to bring about good for that community and society. And the church is to influence politics, business, medicine, education, and health. And so the people who are leading in politics or education or whatever sphere of society are to be those who are living out biblical culture, reflecting the character of Christ. That's the vision that I have tried to plant into Watoto Church. So the transformation of Uganda is not because I preach better sermons. The transformation happens when Christians take Christ culture into their sphere of influence and bring about transformation there.
Amen. And you do that in various ways, through cells, through the various leadership platforms that you avail people to the church, through the ministries of the church. And so, can you even count? Do you know the number of leaders you've raised over the years? Is it even possible?
And no, it's not possible.
Not possible.
Thousands. Well, there are thousands. God's very clearly, Jesus very clearly said to me one day, "Who do you think you are?" And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Who do you think you are anyway?" I said, "I'm sorry, I don't understand." He said, "You think you pastor these thousands of people." We had about 5,000 people coming to church. I said, "I do." And then he said this, he said, "Nobody can pastor more than 12 people. Even my son, 10 people." He said, "Even my son Jesus only pastored 12. Who do you think you are?" And I knew we were to be a small group church. And so we started what we call the cell ministry. And today we have about almost 3,000 small groups in the church. And then I began to understand that actually it was a way to pastor a big church. You could grow an unlimited sized church, and every cell leader actually does pastoral ministry, cares for a small group. But it was about raising leaders.
Yeah.
So if I have 3,000 cells, I have 3,000 leaders. And every leader is to be mentoring at least one other leader or two. So actually 3,000 becomes 6,000. And then every 5 cells is a section, every 5 sections is a zone, every 5 zones is a region, so on. We have 10,000 leaders in the church.
And leadership is one way to multiply.
It's all about multiplication. And that leadership is the same. The leadership principles for the church are the same as leadership principles for anywhere. So our dream is to raise leaders at every level who will go into society and bring about cultural, societal transformation by living out the culture of Christ as leaders and multiplying it in others. That's Watoto Church.
That's Watoto Church. And so you do all of this work, years are passing by,
Hmm.
and the sun has to set at some point.
Yeah, it does.
So what was that like for you to start to go to that place?
I knew it would happen. There is a little bit of the thought that as a white pastor, I needed to raise up a black pastor. There is that thinking in society. There's also that thinking in the whole missionary concept of you come as a foreigner, but you leave the church in the hands of local people. So from the very beginning, we knew that was going to happen. And it was never about raising my sons to take over my place. It was about raising spiritual sons to take over that place. So I knew from the very beginning that we would do that. But about 10, 12 years before I turned 65, I began to talk transition. And they said, why are you talking about transition? I said, because it's going to come. I said, they said it's years away. I said, I know. That's why we need to get ready now. So we began to talk succession. And then the leadership, the elders of the church, came up with a plan, a 5-year plan between my 65th birthday and my 70th birthday, when I would hand over slowly, so that at 65 I would still be leading, but others would be leading beside me. And then when I became 70, I would hand it over completely. And 70 is pretty old in Uganda, with the life expectancy being much younger. People retire here at 55 or something, So when we hit 65, I began to let the other pastors, Julius particularly, who has taken over now, lead. And for those 5 years, I led from behind. And when we were 70, we had a transition service where I washed his feet and said, "You're leading." And we stepped back, and our goal is only to serve Julius or that church in any way that they want us to.
And if they say thanks but no thanks?
That's what they say. It's not mine. Never has been my church. It's always been Jesus' church. And if they say no thanks, I have to accept that. And the church will change, because the church always takes, any organization takes on the character and the personality of its leader. That's just the way it is. And I do hope that we would see that the church is a family, not a business. In a business, well, as a family, I'm a father. I hope I'm a spiritual father. You don't get rid of your fathers, but your father gives the responsibility to the sons and then sits back and eats ice cream.
Mostly. What did you have to go through? What was that process for you, having served the church all these years, to start to, and I'll use this word because of lack of to separate yourself? Yeah, what was that like for you?
Difficult. I thought that it would be fairly easy to walk away from it. The truth is you do get tired, or more tired, and you don't want to be getting up every day early and running off to do all these multitude of things. So that part, the slower pace, is something that we've enjoyed. Not being in contact with decision making or the processes was a bit wrenching, because that's who you are as an individual. I think no matter how much you prepare yourself for transition, it's not easy. And unfortunately, most transitions don't go well. A lot of them go actually quite bad. And it's important.
That's why we're doing this podcast.
That's why we're doing this podcast. Yeah, because it's difficult for people. I think that it's important for those who are transitioning out to let go. You have to let go. And for me, that's not been difficult. But I think the person who is also letting go hopes that you will still have some kind of, as an elder, wisdom and insight and counsel that you can give to those who have it's been transitioned to. I think those that it's transitioned to need to genuinely feel Yes, I'm in charge. It's my responsibility. It's not the previous leadership's responsibility. I'm going to get on with it. But I think there's wisdom in continuing to have a relationship that is mutual and is different, where there's freedom for the new people to run as they wish to run, but also wisdom enough to say, you've done this for many years. Am I doing this well? Am I making mistakes? I think there needs to be a continued relationship that's there. As I said, I think for me, the church is a family, and I'm a father. And your father gets older. You don't chase him away. You still ask his advice. You don't have to take his advice, and he doesn't expect you to. And sometimes you will. And we all make mistakes. I'll make mistakes having transitioned. And people who are in the process of taking the new responsibility will make mistakes. It's okay. Just get over it. We are human, So it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing. And I think if you look at famous presidents in the U.S. who can only serve for 8 years at the most, they go through some tough times after they are out. And they have to pick up other things. Some become painters and some become speakers all over the place. It's a difficult thing.
Yeah.
What I think those that are transitioning out want is to feel that their years of experience and wisdom is still available and can be helpful to those who are now taking it. And I think what's important for those who are taking it is to feel the freedom to say, I don't have to be held by what happened yesterday. I can create some things that are new.
What was it like to prepare the next leader?
Not difficult at all. In fact, I didn't just raise a leader. There were probably 10 people. I could have chosen any one of 10.
Okay.
And it had to be something that I felt in my heart. This is the person. And that's what we
But
did.
so you started to prepare them all at the same time?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I could have chosen a number of people. And our leadership is a team.
Yes.
When one of the things that I did very early on in building Watoto Church was to get away from boards. Chairman of boards, secretary treasurer. Oh, the Ugandans love those titles. And even if you meet someone, oh, this is Engineer John, you are identified by your job. And I don't think that's healthy. And it's sometimes a bit arrogant, because after all, I'm an engineer. Who are you?
Yes.
And that comes across. And that's part of what young people don't like, is this sense of, I went to university and I've got this degree for that. I'm more important than you. You didn't even finish high school, and that whole concept. So we blew that apart and we made a deacons team. We made an elders team. We made a team of pastors as opposed to a board of elders, and we don't have chairman. I ceased. I wanted to stop being called the senior pastor. We changed the names because I needed to shatter some of those old things that I felt were too constricting for young people. You still have to have structure and form and so on, but it's just a little different.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And how is it to then, my father is an Anglican priest, and I think one thing that I loved about watching him serve or just being in the church broadly is the power of ritual and the way it is very representative of, and I love the way you said that what you did for that was have a service and do this public process where everybody sees this. Do you think that, is that important today?
We
didn't fly by the, I see you.
We crafted that service very, very carefully to the letter. The first thing that happened was the Watoto Children's Choir sang a song. Bamuyita Yesu.
Oh, I love that song.
Bamuyita Yesu. And from the start of that service to the end of that service, it wasn't about Julius. It wasn't about Gary. It was about Jesus.
Keep the main thing the main thing.
The main thing is Jesus. I sang, which I used to do all my growing up as a boy and a young pastor. I sang. I did a lot of singing. I hadn't sung for years. They were all doing it. But I, at that transition service, sang. And I sang Andre Crouch's song about Jesus. And everything was about Jesus. It wasn't about Julius. We didn't enthrone Julius.
Yeah.
And we didn't say goodbye to Gary. It was Jesus is building his church and we're just the people at this point in time. It was crafted very, very carefully. I think if we have a good understanding of transition, there shouldn't be a reason why a president of a nation should be able to hand over the responsibilities, but continue to be loved and respected and honored and his advice sought. The problem is that sometimes the old guys don't want to let go. And sometimes the young guys don't want to hear from the old guys. And I think we need to break that. We need to break that. We need to see that we are together in the process of life, building something that is bigger than us. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about Jesus, God, but it's also about the people.
And maybe that's what makes the transitions hard, that we make it about us.
Yeah.
And then it's, you're literally...
We want to be honored.
Kicking and screaming.
We want to be honored, and we should be. We want to be respected, and we should be. We want to be well spoken of, and we should be. Boy, so often in the world of politics and all the rest, nobody has any good thing to say about anybody else. You listen to what's happening in the president elections in the United States. I can't watch it. The church needs to change that by the example that we leave behind, where we speak well of one another. And it needs to happen in nations, needs to happen in institutions, in businesses, because change is the only thing that's never going to change.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you for your wisdoms. Thank you for sharing your story. Of course, you cannot be with a churchman and a singer and be a PK without ending with a song. And so this is a special from Gary and I, my father, pastor's child. So I will follow after you.
Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.